In this lesson, we will be talking about shapes. So all the shapes that we see here in our toolbar, like the spiral shape, the rectangle, the ellipse, the stars or polygons, and then also we will be talking about the calligraphy tool. So INKSCAPE gives us the possibility to go through these tools here to create a standard ready-made shape that then we can go and alter and resize and shape as we please. So you can see here we have the rectangle and squares tool with the shortcut R. We have the create circles, ellipses and arcs tool with the shortcut E. We have the create stars and polygons tool with the shortcut star sign. And then we also have the create spirals tool. Before starting, it is useful to choose the style of the shape. So we can do that by double clicking, for example, on the first tool that we will be talking about, which is the rectangles and square. So let's double click on it. And now the preferences dialog menu will open up. You can see here in this window, it says style of new objects, and we have the option to choose last used style. So that means that whatever fill color or stroke color that we chose, then it will be the same for the following objects that we will be creating. Or else we can choose this tool's own style. And we have to go ahead and choose the fill color and if it has a stroke. But for now, let's go ahead and use last used style and let's close this dialog. So let's go ahead and try and draw a rectangle. You click anywhere on your screen and then you start dragging out with your mouse. So notice how I can go in any direction that I want and then I can release and I have my rectangle drawn with the fill in this pink color and also the stroke in this pink. And you can see the style of it up here on the right corner of our canvas. So while we still have our tool selected, without changing tool, we can notice that we have these nodes and points that we can use to alter the shape. Now we can alter it slightly, but not too much. We can resize it, for example, by clicking on this node here and dragging it out. The same with the node on the top left corner. We can drag it whichever direction we want so that we can resize and reshape it slightly. But it is also possible to use a shape as a starting point for something else. But we need to convert the shape into a regular path. So to do this, we need to select the shape with our selector tool. So it is selected now, like so. Then we need to go to the path drop-down menu up here and then select object to path. And we can see here on the right, the shortcut is Shift, Ctrl, and the letter C. So let's select that. And you will notice that there isn't much of a difference at the moment. But now if we select our node tool, selecting the letter N on our keyboard, you will see that now this shape has independent nodes. So that gives us the possibility to click and alter the shape a lot more than we could before. Notice how much more of a difference. Before we could only scale it in different directions. Now we can completely alter the shape using these steps. So we can move these nodes. We can also add a node by double clicking on the path. We can also select two nodes and with the shortcut Shift I, we can add a node right in the middle of those two. So notice that we have much more of a alteration now. We can really make this shape completely different from it starting off from a rectangle square. Now we are able to transform it in a completely different shape. But let's delete this and talk more in depth about our Create a Rectangle tool. So to create a rectangle, as I mentioned before, the shortcut is the letter R on our keyboard. So notice now how our cursor has changed to the rectangle. So we can click anywhere on our screen and start dragging to create a rectangle. And you can see that I can move it in any direction. But I can also drag it from the center if I just keep my Shift key selected. So now I'm selecting my Shift key and I'm able to create a rectangle or a square starting from a center point, like so. Also, if I select my Ctrl key and I keep it pressed while I'm clicking and dragging, I can constrain the height and width to certain proportions. And if I drag it out diagonally, I can make a perfect square, like so. If I do the same thing, keep the Ctrl key pressed, click, and start dragging. If I drag more to the side, I can get the golden ratio. And you can notice this in the status bar below, where it says constrained to golden ratio 1.618 to 1. If I keep dragging, I can get to a 2 to 1 ratio, and then I can drag again, and I can reach a 3 to 1 ratio, and so on the more I drag. 4 to 1, 5 to 1, and so on. And you can see all of this from the status bar below. So once I have my rectangle drawn, I can use the handles to resize it, like so. Just click and drag where I want it to resize to, or I can click my Ctrl key, and when I'm dragging, I can only change it, for example, in the width or in the height, like so. Also, if I want this rectangle to have precise numerical values, I can insert them here in this tab above. So I can put in a precise width, I can put in a precise height, and so on. And as you may notice in our rectangle, these two nodes are square, but the little node on the top right corner is round. This is because with this one, we can adjust the corners of our rectangle to make them round. So notice that by clicking it, so I will do it again, by clicking and then starting to drag, I am rounding out the corners all the way to making it an oval shape. And you will notice that another handle has appeared up here, and this is to further round our corners. This handle will round them vertically, instead this handle will round them horizontally, like so. So it is very easy then to create almost a perfect circle. If I want to make them the same, all I need to do is click Ctrl, and the amount of rounding will be the same vertically and horizontally. And then if I want to go back to having straight corners, all I need to do is go up to the commands bar and select this icon, make corners sharp, so that our corners go back to a perfectly sharp shape. But now, for example, if I were to make this rectangle with rounded corners, like so, and change the opacity, I can do this down here next to the status bar, where it says O and it's 100, this is the opacity. I can change the opacity and make it 50, for example. Enter to make it 50% opacity. And then if I double click on my tool here to open the preferences dialog and make sure that the last used style is selected, and then I close it up. Now every rectangle that I create after will have the exact same style. It will have the rounded corners and 50% opacity. And I can just change the proportions of it, but the style will be the exact same. Now let's delete all of this and move on to the ellipse. So I'm going to select all of this and press delete on my keyboard to delete all the shapes. So let's move on to the create circles, ellipses, and arcs with the shortcut E. So I can select it, and the same with the rectangle tool, all you need to do is click and before releasing, start dragging. Notice in this case that even here, the opacity is low, and that is because when I double click on my tool to open the preferences, even here it will say last used style. But we can close this up and very easily just change the opacity back to 100%. Enter, and now we have a 100% opacity circle. Instead of dragging from the corner, if we select Shift and then click and start dragging, it will drag out from the center of where I clicked in the first place. Instead, if I select the Ctrl key, click and start dragging, it will constrain the height and width by dragging it diagonally like so. So it will be a perfect circle, and it will constrain in 2:1, 3:1 ratios if I drag it diagonally. And you can still see this in our status bar below. You can notice constrained to ratio 5:1. I can drag back 4:1, 3:1, and so on. If I select the Alt key instead and then start dragging, the circumference is drawn from the point where I started to drag. So that is also a useful shortcut. You may notice that even here in the ellipses, we have different styles of handles. The square handles, we use them to change the height, like so, and the width in this way. If I select my Ctrl key and then click on the handles, I can make a perfect circle. The round handle here instead does something very different. This is used to make arcs or segments. So if I click this and move it, notice now how I am making segments or semispheres, like so. When I'm doing this, a second handle will appear, and you will notice it here. And I can also move this one so that I can make the shape more precise. If I keep my Ctrl key selected, this will move in 15-degree increments, like so. But I can also change this shape by using these commands up here in the command bar. So for example, switch to slice, which it is now. This is a slice, which I can change like so. I can alter it in this way. Then I can select switch to arc, so an unclosed shape, and this I can also modify and make it a perfect half arc, for example. I can also select switch to chord, so to a closed shape. So in this case, it will be a closed shape, and I can still alter it like this. And then I can also select make the shape a whole ellipse. So if we have accidentally changed this like so, then I can select this icon, make the shape a whole ellipse, and get my circle back. I also have the possibility to emit precise values for a circle as well, always using our space up here. And we can also choose the unit of measurement up here. So for example, if I wanted to make a perfect semicircle, I could emit 180 here at the start, enter, and notice now that the circle has become a perfect semicircle. But always keep in mind that since we have chosen use the last style in the preference menu, every shape we create after will have the same values. So it will keep creating these semicircles. So make sure to reselect, make the shape a whole ellipse, and that way when we go out to draw a new one, it will be a perfect ellipse. So let's delete all of these also. Let's take our selector tool, select all of these shapes and delete. And now we can move on to stars and polygons tool. The shortcut for this is the star sign or asterisk. And again, even with this shape, all we need to do is click and without releasing, start dragging like so. And then we will have our star shape. We can choose which type of shape up here on the top. So we can choose between a star or we can choose a regular polygon, like so. We also have the possibility to choose the amount of corners this shape will have. So we can make them more. We can make it into an octagon, for example, and keep going as much as we want. And we can also do this with the star shape. Notice how much that has changed now. We can add more points or less. And we really are able to change this shape as freely as we want. If we go back and make 5-corner star, we can also try dragging a shape out, clicking the Ctrl key on our keyboard. This will make sure that we drag it out straight, like so. You'll notice here in our star shape that it has two handles, one outer point and one inner point, and we can drag both of these out to change and reshape our star, and notice that we can really make it much different from where it started. Instead, with our polygon, we only have one handle, and this one we can only reshape like so. With our star shape instead, for example, this inner handle can add skew to the star, if you can notice here. So let's make it a little bit bigger, and this way we can notice the skewing more. But if you don't want it to skew, just click Ctrl on your keyboard and then move it. And this will only change the thickness of the star. If we select Shift while clicking and dragging these handles here, it will round out our shape like so. And we can change this value also from these values above. We can make it more or less rounded even from here. We also have the option to randomize. So if we select this, we can really alter the shape a lot. Notice how completely different it is from the initial star that it used to be. And to randomize without having to click up here, all we need to do is select Alt and move these handles. And then we will be completely randomizing the shape. The last shape tool that we're going to look at is the spiral tool. So let's delete this and let's select our spiral tool in our toolbar. Click and start dragging, and then we can release. You will notice that the spiral tool has two nodes, one on each end of the spiral. So if I select one, I can continue the spiral like so, and I can select the other one and start dragging and reduce the turns. I'm just going to move this here. If I select Shift while clicking these, I can rotate the spiral like so. So I'm not actually adding shapes, but just rotating. And instead, if I select Alt while dragging, this will block the radius, so you can add or remove as many turns as you want, but the radius will always stay the same. This shape also has the tool controls here on top, so you can choose how many turns the spiral has. You can choose the divergence, for example, and this is the space between turns. If the divergence is higher than 1, so let's say almost 3, for example, this will make the inner turns denser. Instead, if it is below 1, so let's say 0.5, for example, this will make the outer turns denser and the inner ones much wider. The inner radius value instead determines where the inner handle is. So if we put in 0, for example, so let's insert 0, it will bring the handle right at the center of our spiral. Instead, if we have a higher value like 0.75, for example, then the handle will be moved closer to the outer one, like so. And then also right next to all of these values, we have this button here that is the reset value button. So reset shape parameters to default. So I can select that, and now our spiral is back to default. So now that we have talked about all of our shapes here in our toolbar, we can go ahead and start talking about the calligraphy tool. We can find the calligraphy tool here in our toolbar right here, and it's called Draw Calligraphic or Brush Strokes with the shortcut letter C on our keyboard. So the calligraphy tool is very interesting as it really resembles actual ink in a very natural way. You can draw fill paths that vary in thickness and angle, and according to the settings you choose above in these tool controls. So the first one is width. The value of the width is the maximum width of the path that you can draw. So I can put in 5, I can put in 4 or 6, for example. And now if I draw, this will be the widest that the path can go to. I can also choose the unit of measurement, so millimeters, points, inches, centimeters, percentage, and so on. But let's leave it at millimeters for now. Next to the width, we have this little icon that is called pressure sensitivity. So you can enable this if you're using a pen tablet. I am not using one, so I have disabled it right now as I won't be needing it. Right next to it is this icon here, which is called trace the lightness of the background by the width of the pen. So this is a button for creating special effects when you're tracing over an image, for example. So if you trace over a dark area, the stroke will get thicker. And if you're tracing over a light area, it will get thinner. So this is also a very interesting tool. We can try clicking it and notice that the width of the pen has gotten thicker over the drawing part. Right next to this, we have thinning. Thinning varies the weight of the path according to the speed that you draw with. If I were to put in 50, for example, I can start drawing slow, speed up really fast, and then draw slow again. So this will make one area thinner and the other one larger. So the more you draw slowly, the thicker the width will be, and the more you draw fast, the thinner it will be. Mass right next to it will increase to make the pen drag behind as if it is slowed by inertia. So if I bring this down and I start dragging, it will be very fast. If I bring this up and then click and start dragging, notice how further back the stroke is compared to my cursor. That has to do with this mass. So let's bring it back down to 2. Angle will mimic the angle of a calligraphic pen to determine the path width, and you can have a fixed angle or have the angle be determined by the tilt of your pen. So for example, if we have the angle at 0, the tip of the pen would be horizontal. So horizontal strokes will be thin and vertical strokes will be thicker. Instead, if I put this at a 90-degree angle instead, let's see, the horizontal strokes will be thick and the vertical strokes will be thinner. Fixation determines how much Inkscape actually honors your angle settings. So if it is 100, your angle is completely taken into consideration, for example. So let's bring this to 100. And now let's try drawing again and again. And notice the difference. As you decrease fixation, you will get less variation between thick and thin until at 0, there's no difference at all. So we can try putting in 0 and drawing. And notice how the width is completely the same. Caps controls what happens at the end of a stroke. So 0 gives straight blunt ends, as we have seen here. Instead, if we put in 1, it should give rounded caps. So let's try and notice how now the edges are round. So you should be able to go all the way up to 5, for example. Let's try with 5. And that will really stretches out the caps. Tremor and wiggle simulate a shaky hand to add variation and not have a perfect path. So this we can bring it up, for example, and bring this one up, for example. And you will notice it more if you draw slower. So notice how more trembly that is. Also up here on the left, we have a menu to choose pen presets. So you can scroll through these and try them out. Marker, for example, brush, wiggly. So you can try all of these out, but you also have the possibility to create your own one. So following all of these values that we have inserted up here, for example, You can add your own by selecting this icon here right next to the presets menu. So add or edit calligraphic pen. And here you can add a name, save it, and then you would find it here in the menu along with all the other presets. So now that we have talked about all of the various shapes that we can find inside of our toolbar in Inkscape and also how to use the calligraphic pen, we can end the lesson here. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comment box below. And if you want to give our page some support, make sure to subscribe and stay updated on all the new courses. Thank you for following along. I will see you in the next video.